Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to IBPSA's The Legalities of a Tough Situation, COVID-19 with Don Phin, Esquire. He is a employment attorney out of California. We have almost 100 attendees on the session today. Natalie, our vendor concierge is here, and she will be taking your questions as Don asks for them. So without further ado, Don, thank you so much for doing this.
All right, I look forward to helping you folks. We're almost getting at the tail end of these webinars. I've done over a dozen of them with thousands of employers by now. So just by way of very quick background for all of you, you hear my Bronx accent. That's not a California accent. I came out here when I was 19, but I started an employment law practice and I represented employees. And at the end of my career, represented nuclear power plant whistleblowers, and my life turned into a John Grisham novel. But I also realized that the justice system doesn't always deliver much justice. And the people who I put money in their pockets, it was gone within 3 years. And I just thought the whole system was upside down. So I quit at 40. Then I did a lot of turnaround and management consulting. Then I built an HR company. I had 3,500 companies using it. I sold that. And over the last couple of years, I have focused on coaching executives and speaking all around the country. Okay, so that's kind of the very quick background. But of course, all the speaking gigs got canceled. The coaching work is trickling in now instead of flooding in. And where can I be most useful? Helping people with all of this, because I do know how to read the law and talk about things. I've also had an experience in risk management, not just employment law, for all these years. So you'll hear all of that coming into it. And I'm not your lender, I'm not your CPA, I'm not even your lawyer, and I will stay in my lane. And I'm really going to talk about the employment law aspects today. I will touch on these loans and things like that, but that's where you really got to work with your CPA and your bankers, which are very hard to get to right now, right? So let's get moving. We have just been overwhelmed. We have just been overwhelmed with information about this. It reminds me, for a couple of years, we left San Diego to live in the Palm Beach area. One of my clients invited me out there, and we went through hurricane seasons. And in the first 2 years I was there, we had 3 hurricanes come overhead. So I ended up doing a lot of work with the South Florida Manufacturers Association to help them and their employers do better disaster planning and recovery and communications with employees, what's all the laws involved. And this is not all dissimilar to that. It's just that that's a shorter time span. This is a dragged out situation, but a lot of the same laws are involved from an employee standpoint. And I just remember that red dot coming to us. So now we see these dots getting bigger and bigger and shrinking, hopefully soon enough. So what are we going to talk about? First thing is, I like to have the conversation about how we show up in all of this. All right, and that'll be brief. Then we're going to talk about the laws that were passed now almost 2 weeks ago about the sick leave and the expanded FMLA. A lot of the employers go, okay, do I terminate people? Do I furlough people? Do I lay off people? What do I do with all of this? And I'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about the law that came out last week, the CARE Act. We'll talk about how you pay for some of this between credits and loans. And then I'm going to get into some of the more mundane wage and hour concerns, some of the other laws that are involved, some of the safety laws that are involved, state laws that are involved, and just touch on some best practices. One of the things I am is a speaker for the Vistage organization. That's a CEO organization. I've spoken for them for some 400 times. So I'm involved in their network of all these employers saying, what do I do with this? How do I handle that? And watching what they've been doing. And so it's not just a conversation about the law, it's also about how do we maintain our essential business operations? Where do we go from here? Okay, so that's what we're going to get through it. As you can see, I'll make it fast paced. Now, when it comes to questions, I know there will be questions. Again, I'm going to stay in my lane. But what I'll do is naturally take a pause after certain points in all of this to see if anybody's got questions about what I talked about. If your questions don't relate to what I talked about, just hold on to them, because chances I'll touch them, and at the end, I have no next webinar to do right now. I'll stay on and answer questions for reasonable time afterwards, okay? So there we go. Now, just when we thought we had our stuff together, right? Just when everything was going well, enters this chaos. All right, so we've always had to deal with this duality out there. You know, Buddha talked about happiness and sadness, that duality. The order and the chaos is another duality. And the question is, how do we manage this? As the Buddha would say, what's the middle way between all of this? And having advised employers through 2008, 2009, and other crisis situations, I'm brought in like the wolf in Pulp Fiction. Hey, you brought in the wolf. People bring me into these very hairy situations. Could I help them handle them well? All right. And one thing I remind them before we get into the actual steps about it is 2 words I want them to focus on as we go through any type of chaotic situation. The first word is responsibility. So what you don't want to have out of this whole thing is regret, guilt, or remorse. And if you act responsibly and gracefully, then you won't. Okay? So if you don't want to have regret, guilt, and remorse looking back 3 months from now or however it's going to be, you want to know that you did act responsibly, you did act with grace, and that's the best you can possibly do. So when I talk about acting responsibly, one of the things is obviously to know the law. Coming on a webinar like this is a good way to be responsible. But what's important where employers can get stuck is this whole business of being difference between responsibility for employees and responsibility to employees. So the only place where you are responsible for employees is where the law says you are, and that's called OSHA and wage and hour and some of these other things we're going to talk about. That's where you're responsible for another adult because it's really an environmental factor. You are not, and I emphasize this, you are not responsible for another adult's finances. They are adults. Nobody's responsible for your finances. You're an adult. You are only responsible to other adults when it comes to that. So a lot of employers can get caught up in a concern about my employees. And look, I've had employees. I'm a big fan of engaged relationships, but I want to make sure we don't get caught up in the emotional trap of thinking I am somehow responsible for my employees when I had nothing to do with this. And their fragility around things financially is on them. That's their responsibility as an adult for themselves. Now, to the extent you can help mitigate some of that, awesome, but you don't self-sacrifice in the process. And if that's one of the biggest messages with everybody, you do not have to self-sacrifice. You're already going through a bunch of own stuff. You don't have to self-sacrifice for other adults in the process, okay? Now, you do that logically. You get all the logic. Ask the question, what else do I have to do to be responsible here? And you exhaust that, and then you've done what you need to do logically. Well, we can have all the logic working in the world, but then just show up poorly. You talk about employee engagement. You can show up in a very disengaging way, for example. And in all the work that I've done in teaching around what we'll call emotional intelligence, if I was to boil down that entire conversation about how we show up, I think the word is gracefully. So we want to show up, and I can't think of a better word. I'd like to show up to all of this gracefully, at work, at home, with my clients, with myself, never mind just anybody else, right? That means I don't play victim games, right? We're not a victim. This is stuff that's happened to us. We'll get through this. This is going to test if we can be anti-fragile, which I'll talk about. All right, so responsibility and grace. Now, 2 laws were passed 3 weeks ago having to deal with A, sick pay, and B, family leave, all right? So both these laws have now kicked in. It's past April 1st, and you're supposed to put up your notices. The regulations, which I'll show you later, have said it's okay to email them or post them on your website someplace or do something like that, or text them. All of you are under 500 employees, so this act applies to all of you. Now, we're going to talk about the exemptions out of the act in a minute. If anybody's worked for you for 80 hours, then rather they'll work for you 1 day before this law kicked in, they're entitled to 2 weeks of pay if they're still on payroll, which we'll come to. So if your place is open, and many of you are not, we'll come to that in a minute. Again, only if you're open will you have to pay this, and only if somebody's unable to work. So if they're able, you open and they're able to work and they choose not to work, then they don't get the sick pay. All right. So what ends up happening is there's two different types of categories broken down 6 ways basically, and they've added some other ones that don't really apply to you. The first 3 categories is there's something wrong with me as the employee. So I'm sick, or I was told to stay home, or I can't work because the whole business shut down, right? And for those people, you get sick pay of up to $511, or a total of $51.10 for 2 weeks, right? They can't be asked to use anything else. They just get it, all right? And when you're taking care of somebody else, whether it's because the school is closed or they're sick or something like that, then in that situation, you get 2/3 pay, and you'll see how that carries over into the extended FMLA. You're taking care of yourself, you get full pay. Take care of somebody else, you get 2/3 pay. Now the facts have said that at any one of these things, let's say you get normally paid more than $511 a day, well then you can use some of your PTO, or they want employers to negotiate with people to use this. You can't require people to use sick pay. So if they got vacation or paid time off, then they can agree to use it because they want to supplement their pay. There may be also some opportunities with unemployment, shared unemployment. So you can see there's a lot of moving parts in all of this, all right? So what ends up happening after these 2 weeks, now, if you're going to stay open, odds are somebody's going to be using this. And in fact, over the next 2 months, if you stay open, probably everybody's going to be using this at some point. All right, so they're going to get paid 2 weeks. Now, the good news is we'll see later on, all this comes back to you. All right, it all comes back to you. It's really about floating the dollars, right? And I know that you're not like my investment advisors that even though my stocks have gone down, their offices open, they're still managing. Nobody's going home. A lot of you have been shut down, and so you can't even be in this world right now. Now, they also said that typically the FMLA applies to companies with 50 or more employees. And by the way, everybody goes, why only this burden on companies with less than 500 employees? Well, the reason that Congress did that is because they didn't want to give handouts to large companies, okay? So this was done to favor small businesses at the disfavor of large businesses. Now we're going to, bail some industries out, but not all of them. Google's not going to get a break, hopefully, right? So the sick pay is 1 day. With extended FMLA, it's 30 days of employment before they work for you, and it's really just about school and daycare closure, which everybody has right now. All right, so if somebody's staying at home because they're a kid, then they're able to get this leave up to 12 weeks. And it's also paid at 2/3 because normally FMLA is unpaid leave. You just get job protection and benefits. Now they brought it down to 50 or under, and you're going to may pay somebody out as much as 10 grand. So they might get 2 grand plus 10 grand for a total of 12 grand. And you can pretty much assume that's going to, if you stay open, that you're going to get hit with these things. All right. Now, my guess is none of you are over 50 employees, so traditional FMLA really doesn't apply. Now, if you're under 25 employees and somebody takes this leave, then they get their job back unless their job was eliminated. And they also talk about, keep trying to get them their job back, even if it's a slightly different job, or if you stay in touch with them for the next year to do it. All right. So unlike traditional employers with 50 or more, those people get their job back pretty much. It's a very rare exception unless there's been a shutdown of the position completely, a complete elimination of the duties. In this situation, they realize that you just can't do that with your size companies, so you can see how they've languaged about it. All right. So just let me recap a little bit of this before I open it up to questions. Provide your notices to employees. You let them know that you put it on the website someplace, email it out, text it out, but just make sure everybody gets it. And you can even say, can you please confirm that you got this? If you've got any questions, let us know. If they have a problem, it's 100% pay. If somebody else has got the problem, it's 2/3 pay. The FMLA benefit only applies to school closures and daycare closures, and that doesn't mean grandma watching the kids, a licensed daycare facility. No pay for the first 10 days on the extended FMLA leave. And if they're not using the emergency sick pay, well, they can also use PTO and things like that if they choose to, all right? Quarantine workers, or those who are caring for affected family members, are not eligible for the FMLA pay benefit, okay? It's just kids at home because of school and daycare. But again, it's a lot of the population. And what the facts have made very clear, so the government's been issuing these facts, we're up to 59 of them now, that if your business closes, that cuts all this off. Even if they're in the middle of sick leave, it just cuts it off. And one more here. So this DOL fact, which I'm going to show you when I get out of the PowerPoint, here's just some highlights in it. I encourage all employers to read through it very quickly. Some of it just won't apply to you. You'll notice that right away. So in your business, nobody's able to telework. It's very hard to do animal watching teleworking, but there might be somebody who's a staff member who really doesn't have to be physically present, who can work from home. And if they can work from home and they choose not to, this is not available to them, okay? If the work site is shut down because you're a non-essential business and they've told you to stay home, then this doesn't apply either. Then they're going into unemployment. You can agree and work out with your, let's say somebody is at home watching a kid, but they're 15, all right? So that's not really going to stop you from getting work done, but you may have to check in with them for a couple hours in a day and make sure the homework's getting done, all that kind of nonsense, emotionally support your kid through all this and say, I can work 6 hours of the day and I can take intermittent FMLA leave for 2 hours of the day, all right? Now, I get that this is going to be challenging for some people from a payroll standpoint, but I've talked to a number of these payroll companies. They've had to jump on this. So they're realizing that they have to set up their payroll structures so that you're getting paid different ways, and they're taking advantage of the payroll credits and things like that. So you really get to find out how good your payroll partner is, as well as your financial partner, as well as your banking partner throughout all of this. Who's going to step up to the plate, right? And remember that the paid leave is in addition to any other leave. All right? So if for some reason they're getting any other income from someplace, they're still entitled to the paid leave, all right? After the first 2 weeks, let's say somebody's got a PTO bank and they want to stay on FMLA. So they've used up the sick pay. You can't say, I want you to use the PTO bank before you go into the federal sick pay. They get to 2 weeks of federal sick pay. You can then tell them, I insist that you use your PTO up, unless there's some policy or something that says that you can't do that to employees, but most employers have that right. It's a traditional right under FMLA and some other laws. So that we want you to use up the PTO because I don't want you taking this 12 weeks of paid on FMLA and then I got to pay you PTO for 2 weeks. All right, so you can push that out on the front end. And again, no reinstatement is required, and all of you can read, unless the job doesn't exist anymore. So let's say you get hit really hard and you had to permanently lay off half the people. Well, maybe that job just doesn't exist anymore, okay? So before I get into decision time, I think this is a good place to just take a break, see what questions we might have before I go rolling on.
Sure thing, Don. I've got one question here, but before I read that to you, I want to let our audience know that from our end, we're having some trouble typing into the question box. So if you are having that trouble as well, I just checked and the chat box is working. So if you're having trouble, one or the other should work for you. I just cannot answer you via the question box. But the question that popped up, Don, is just a clarification that the FMLA applies to 25 to under 500 employees. Is that correct?
No, it applies to everybody under 500. The
Everybody under.
reinstatement rights are tweaked for people with 25 or less. Okay, so it applies to everybody, in the whole country at this point. It applies to everybody. Even so, not everybody, companies with 500 or less employees, but then you'll see they've got these carve-outs to smaller companies, and one of the carve-outs was on reinstatement under FMLA.
Okay. And I've got somebody asking if you can pop back to the last slide for just a minute.
And I'm going to give you those links, and all that stuff is on that Corona doc that you'll be getting, so that's all there. And if somebody's got a question about this, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you, she said.
All right, ready to roll?
I think so.
Okay, very good. All right, so I want to go here. So decision time, what do we do? Now, some of you, as I'll show in a little while, you've been shut down as a non-essential business, so not much you can do there. I would argue that there may be some aspects of your business. Let's say if somebody's on a quarantine, can't leave the house, and they're not, it's not a healthy thing for them to leave the house, then maybe you can walk their dog or hold on to their dog for a little while. But I would make sure that I spoke to who's ever, sometimes he's a county-based, sometimes a state-based, and get permission to do something like that. So I'll come back to that in a little bit. But the first question is understanding about languaging, and people get confused between layoffs and furloughs. So a layoff is basically just when you're terminating more than one employee. That's just the languaging. So multiple termination is a layoff, all right? And those people will go into these unemployment programs now. And the crazy thing is, when I'm watching around the country, especially where there's low wage earners in the employment, that these employees are actually going to earn more money on unemployment than working for you. And some of the employees have gotten mad at their employers for not terminating them. It's just insane situation. And you guys are in that spot because you're not high wage employees that are working for you. Many of them are minimum wage or close to minimum wage. And in many states, they're going to get paid more being on unemployment than working for you. So if you worry about keeping the shop open to make sure your employees get paid, I wouldn't worry about that in most places, okay? They're actually going to get paid more than if you kept your shop open, all right? So it's really about thinking about how we can service our customers as opposed to servicing the employees, because the employees might do better if they're terminated, all right? Now, there's always a possibility in any of these laws, if you try to manipulate a situation where you didn't have to shut down, but you're shutting down just so you don't have to do the sick pay or the FMLA, there's retaliation provisions, but I don't see anybody trying to enforce those for a long time. And even said, we've given you a 30-day grace period through all of this stuff to figure it out, all right? Now, if you terminate somebody, or if you lay them off, then you have to go through all the traditional steps of a termination. So, for example, out in California, where I am, the unemployment department has a specific form that you have to give somebody when you're changing their employment, and for the reason of why they're being terminated. Well, your state may have similar things. So one of the things we all want to do is make sure we know what we're supposed to do with our unemployment, and your payroll companies should be very helpful about that. All right, so you can either look at your state unemployment department. They'll have a COVID-19 site. They all do at this point. Your payroll company will have a COVID-19 site, and just see how they can help you out with some of these notices, all right? If you have over 20 or more employees, you're subject to COBRA, and there's the COBRA health insurance continuation notices. Now, some companies will, in order to try to help employees, still pay their portion of the COBRA. There's no legal requirement for you to do that. Remember, if they're on FMLA, they're still getting continued benefits. And we'll talk about furloughs in a minute. All right, I'm talking about termination right now. And there might be some, if they got a 401k or something like that, there's benefit plan notices you have to give out. So all the typical things you've ever done when you terminate somebody, you have to do in all this. And one of the tricky things from a cash flow standpoint, if you're in a place like California, you have to pay out all the accrued vacation. So most states are not forced accrual in vacation law. California and some of the other states are. Most of them stick to the federal standard where it's by agreement or practice. So when you look to your employee handbook and say, what does it say in my employee handbook? How have we handled this in the past? And if we paid people out when we terminate them, then you pay people on used vacation, you pay it out. Some states and some agreements have use it or lose it. In that situation, you're not paying somebody out, okay? And none of these sick pay provisions pretty much say you got to pay out unused sick pay. Typically not at a company policy or if required by state mandate, all right? So that's what happens when you terminate somebody. Now, a furlough, the idea of the furlough is we just don't have work for you right now. I don't want to get rid of you as an employee. We'll keep you in our system. You'll continue to get benefits, and as soon as we have any work, we'll bring you on part-time, stuff like that, until we get you on full-time again. And you can see from the state of Washington, they had to deal with this faster than anybody, right? They're the first place that got whacked in the United States, so their state agencies had to come up with answers to all this before everybody else. And this is what they were defining what a furlough is. So there's a difference. Furlough, people still stay on your payroll and they still get benefits. All right, that's the big main thing. They're still getting benefits, and you've got to check with your benefit provider. Most of the state insurance commissions are saying, hey, we want to keep people considered actively employed if they're furloughed through the coronavirus period. All right, just double check with your broker, and your broker should say, yeah, you're just fine to keep them on if you're going to furlough them. What you, of course, can do is require people to pay what, their portion of the benefit, and then you'll have to figure out what you're going to do if they can't pay that portion of the benefit. All right, and work with your broker on that. Can you convert it into a loan or something like that? And you have to even be tricky about, taking loans out of paychecks later on. So that's furloughs. Right? So some companies are furloughing, some companies are keeping people on payroll even if their work is slowed down. Now, certainly if they can work from home, but other people will keep people on payroll even if they have nothing to do. And if you do that, you get the credit back from the government, which is really strange that you don't have to have any work to do and the government will pay you. But the bottom line is government's going to pay anyway. So this is really about the government saying, if you can handle the cash flow of it, then keep people on, please, we'll pay you back. Otherwise, sticking them on unemployment, we'll pay for it now. Okay? Now, as I mentioned, for many people, I don't think, there's always people wanting to manipulate a system, right? There'll be employers manipulating some of these loans. So there's always manipulation in crisis. But you can see here, people get, you can see what your maximum weekly benefit is. Now, not everybody's going to be entitled to the maximum weekly benefit, right? Depending on what they get paid. But you can add $600 to that per week for the next 39 weeks, which will take us past this crisis. So in other words, people, until they have another, where they're required to come to work, once you say, hey, we've got work for you again, they can't stay on unemployment any longer, all right? And at some point in time, if the economy starts recovering, right now they're saying you don't have to apply for a job because there's no job, so apply for it. They're not forcing anybody to go work at Amazon, which is where a lot of people that work in your industry are going to work for Uber and do these, food delivery gigs. But a lot of them are going to say, hey, what's the point of doing that when I can get just as much doing this? All right, so it's going to be a really interesting thing that, it's going to surface. We're going to see how it really rolls out in the next couple of weeks. Now, one of the reasons they may want to do Uber Drive is because the governments are backed up on delivering this $600, and the unemployment departments, we got 10 times the number of claims, average number of claims in California, with less employers to handle them. Everything's backed up. They say we're going to waive the federal government says we're going to waive the first week of unemployment so people get right away, but they're going to get it in 4 weeks, going backwards, all right? And then, of course, these checks might come out depending on what a lot of your employees, and even many of you will get these checks for roughly $1,200 or graded down under the CARES Act. So the idea with all this is to create some safety net, just like they had to do after the Great Depression, because you can't have this many people out on the street. It just, you can't do that, all right? You're going to see soup lines if you keep that up. So now what you can do, and what some employers are doing is say, you know what, why don't we do a 50-50 situation? You know, I'll have you work one week and somebody else work another week, or you work Monday to Tuesday and you work Thursday, Friday, we'll shut down Wednesday. You can do these joint arrangements with your unemployment department. Just make sure that they are subject to them so that you can pay somebody for a couple of days of the week, right? And the unemployment, then they get unemployment for the other days of the week. They have these hybrid programs all over the place. Now, one of the things they're saying that if you play that little game, and I haven't seen any regs around it, you see the last sentence there, I really don't know what they mean by that, but it's a kind of warning bell saying, hey, if you do the 50-50 thing, we're going to ask you to eventually pay half of that other 50%. Now, they're also saying in a lot of unemployment places, anybody who goes through these programs right now, we're not going to increase your unemployment rate, because as you know, the more turnover you have, the higher percentage you have to contribute into unemployment to pay for that. It's insurance, is what it really is. And they're saying right now, if you take advantage of these programs, we're not going to whack you with that increase. We'll find out. I do not have all the answers. A lot of this is going to shake out, as they say. Now, the small business exemption. And this was really frustrating for a lot of people because we're waiting for the regulations to come out, and we're still waiting, as I'll explain, for a lot of things to happen here. So you've just got to read this, because I cut this right out of the number 58, the fact. I'll show you where that is. Plus the last sentence came from another place about getting reimbursement. So this is the main thing. You don't have to pay out the sick pay, and you would not have to pay out the extended FMLA for daycare pay, if you will, if doing so jeopardizes the viability of the business as an ongoing concern. Now, I know a lot of companies, when this all started, everybody said, hey, look, just stay on payroll. We're going to figure out what's going on here. Maybe this will be over soon, but I think everybody realizes, no, this is not going away in a month. This is going to be at least a 3-month problem. So you have to think that this is going to be at least a 3-month health problem, and then there's going to be a lag for everybody to get back up to business again, of maybe a month or more. So you're almost looking at a 4-month window conservatively, right? So really think in those terms. Now, the exemption applies when you're concerned that the obligations exceeding the business revenues are going to cause you to go into the red, right? Maybe you're already struggling in red, maybe you're already borrowing money to keep your doors open. Also, if you lose some valuable people. So for example, if on one side of your shop you got vets, well, in that situation, those people are gone. That also shows your lack of your viability to keep that business going, right? There are not enough sufficient workers. You can't even hire. There's plenty of companies right now can't even find workers, especially when they can get unemployment and don't have to look for a job, all right? And last, they want you to document all of this. What they have not done is give you a form to document any of this. They haven't given some online application. All that is still being worked out. And that's where, again, you want to work with your bookkeeper, your CPA, and say, listen, it looks to me that I'd be crazy to keep my doors open in this. You're going to really have to know your math. Some of you can keep your doors open doing certain things. We're going to talk about that. But let's say you find other things you can do with your business, and you do decide to keep your doors open. You just won't want to have to pay out for these people while you keep your doors open. Okay? So let me stop there, because that was a boatload in the last few slides, and see what other questions we have.
We have not had any come in. I think you're doing a pretty good job of hitting all the highlights.
Good. I've done enough of these. I kind of get an idea of what the questions are by now, right? And I also know where I'm limited in feeling comfortable giving answers, just because it's not enough. There's not enough there, as they say.
Right.
Right. So how to pay for all this stuff? So the government has sent up essentially 2 separate ways to handle this. One is with credits or for payroll taxes. So money that you owe to the government, they're basically saying you don't have to give it to us, federal government, not state government. So unemployment, all that stuff still applies. But federal government, Social Security, Medicare, those taxes, you can get a credit against those taxes. So let's say you had to lay off 3 of your employees, right? And I'm going to try to keep these other people on payroll, or rather, 3 people went on sick pay. I got 5 other people on payroll. How am I going to pay for those 3 people on sick pay? Well, I can reduce my tax credits for those 5 other people and do it that way. And if that's not going to be enough, I can get a loan eventually. And if I don't think I can do that quickly enough, I can get the loan up front. So you can either handle the payroll credits because you've got enough people causing payroll taxes to credit against them, or you can see this is going to be a problem here pretty quickly. I do want to keep this going. I'd like to get a loan right now because those loans will be forgiven basically, right? As long as you keep people on it. And then the credits, again, to make those payments, some of those loans may be completely wiped away, but at least the payroll taxes are going to be wiped away. And then there's the loans to say, I want to keep people on board, period. And I'm going to come to some of those loans and some of those websites, all right? So you got to think in terms of credits and loans, and what you really have to do is know your math. So one of the groups I did a workshop for was residential cleaning services, all right? And had a couple of their people, they're not franchises, but they have a couple offices, some of the bigger ones. Some of you may have multiple locations. And what they were doing to handle all of that. And the reality, she said, is you have got to run your numbers and know your math. So I couldn't agree with that more, all right? And you got to do this at home too. I sat down with my wife, we went over, okay, well, what do we have in stocks that we can sell? What do we have in savings? What do we have in our checking accounts? What income will possibly come in? How long could this possibly last? Let's work through the matrix. How do we kind of mitigate some of this? Is there any loans we should apply for right now in case we might need them? Or that just be crazy not to take advantage of them? For example, we're both sole proprietors. We both applied for unemployment. See what happens with that, okay? Now, since many of you are small, what they're going to give for the under 100 crew here, you see the second bullet point there in the second sentence. If you keep your doors open, you can get up to a 10 grand credit for those employees. So you can figure, okay, and they're talking about like an 8-week period. So 2 weeks, they're figuring 5 grand per employee max. Remember the previous numbers, that very similar to the previous numbers. So you're going to get it's going to be a forgivable loan in a sense, some of these qualified wages. So if you keep paying people, you're going to be able to completely wipe that out from a tax standpoint later on. All right, you can get a complete credit. Now there's emergency credits, and we'll come to that. So if you want to keep people on board, but I don't have the cash flow to do that. All right, so you apply for emergency credit, and even that stuff is backed up. And then you have the payroll protection loan, which is really, it gives you 2.5 times your payroll. So it really requires you to work with your payroll provider, and it's to show exactly what your payroll has been. You can get 2.5 times that. And if you keep these people on all the way through, that loan will be forgiven. So before we're just talking about credits, that if you don't use them up, you can use them later on taxes, or if you can't use them up quickly enough, you can get a loan for those credits. Now, this is a flat out loan to keep people on. And if you keep people on as a schedule, and there's a lot of information about that. Again, I'm staying in my lane, but just think of it conceptually. This is all about your cash flow, because if you can keep people on, that's free money. They'll forgive it completely. So my advice to any of you is right now, apply for this loan, because all of you have employees. It makes all the sense in the world to apply for this loan, unless you're in a situation where, hey, Don, even if I got the loan, I can't work. We're shut down. by the state or the county, all right? In that situation, you might not be able to apply for loan, but you'll see all the criteria for doing so, all right? And again, they're still banging around the interest rates, but of course, right now, with the Fed being at 0, they're going to be low interest rates. Right? And you can't double dip in some of these other loans. So everybody, the businesses I know, applying for as many things as they can right now. It just makes sense. Let's just apply for everything and figure out what we do once people start saying yes, okay? Because some things might come in faster than others. You just don't know right now. Nobody knows. There are some limits. I doubt anybody over there is making 425 grand a year or more. If you are, that's awesome, but there's limited compensation. And another thing, they said, hey, if you want to be really nice employers and try to incentivize your employees, you can give the student repayment benefit on your student loans, and we'll credit that to you, okay? So somebody lobbied that in to the statute. All right, so let me just stop there before we get into wage and hour. Anything about these credits and these loans? And again, I'm going to take you to some of the websites so you can see exactly what you've got to do.
Some of the questions, you may consider them not to be in your lane, but I'll ask them anyway so that other people might hear them as well. We have
I didn't
someone
sleep
who
at a
says,
solid AM last night, so I'm not pretending to go beyond my legal competence here.
someone says, in order to preserve cash, we laid off 14 of our 25 staff. Am I supposed to rehire them with no work to do, fund the loss, and hope that the PPP loan comes through that they applied for already? But they're only part of their business is running right now anyway.
No, I don't know exactly the answer to that. Okay, my belief system. A lot of this you have to look at conceptually. What makes sense in all this? What makes sense to me is that you get that loan for the employees you still have.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't think they're going to require you to rehire anybody just to sit around and twiddle their thumbs. Those people really should be on unemployment.
Okay. Someone else, Doreen asks, I am paying my employees, but not myself. I am on the payroll and my accountant said I would qualify for unemployment. I am working to manage my business. Should I or can I apply?
I would. Again, my answer to any of this is apply for all of it. All right. So you can even, so I'm a sole proprietor. My wife's a chiropractor. She's a sole proprietor. Right. So we apply for unemployment because they extended the thing to self-employed people under the CARES Act. The Payroll Protection Act allows, if you're in a corporation and you're paying yourself a salary, then you can continue to pay yourself a salary under the Payroll Protection Act up to that limit that I showed about. And so I would look into that. And there's the SBA disaster loans, which is just basically a loan that can be used just like any line of credit could be used. They have more restrictions on the Payroll Protection Act stuff, but it's 2.5 times comp. So it can pay for a lot of things, and it can pay for the roof over your head as well as your employees. And if everybody stays on board, it's forgiven, all of it. So, and a lot of people saying, why wouldn't I get this thing? Now, there's an emergency loan that you can apply for that I did of a 10 grand loan. All right, so you've got to really decide, and this is unfortunately try to getting through to any lenders, getting through to the bank. I try to get through Bank of America for the last 2 days. It's absolutely impossible. You can't, okay? So everybody is so overwhelmed with all of this. It may be a month before you get a penny or anybody gets a penny from anyone about any of this. Even employees under unemployment may not see a check for a month because everything's so backed up, all right? So just be aware that preserving cash to me is job number one for all of you. Okay, let me go. I'm sorry. Anything else there?
I've got one here from Josie. She said, are we required to rehire the exact same employees? And if the boarding business doesn't pick up after the PPL expires, are there any repercussions for letting employees go again if needed?
No, you're not required. The only place that you may be required to rehire employees if you kept them on board and they took advantage of the FMLA leave. That's the only reinstatement requirements I'm aware of. Again, I've read through these regs 15 times. They're still coming out with more all the time because these questions are popping up. People haven't even thought of some of the questions yet, in a sense. So that business, like the questions that was just asked me, I have not seen that in a fact anyplace. Now, it may be buried, and I've read so much that my eyes are going like this nowadays. And if somebody finds it, let me know. Let everybody know, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so now let's talk about traditional wage and hour, because if you play this game of, okay, let's take a haircut, everybody's getting a 20% haircut. The thing you have to watch, A, is you don't take people down below minimum wage. That's pretty clear. The second thing you have to make sure is you don't take your exempt employees below the exempt salary threshold. Remember, in order to be exempt, you have to be paid on a salary basis. But if you remember in the Obama administration, they were trying to put that exempt, make a lot of people non-exempt. So they're trying to push that number really high. Well, Trump administration kind of shut it down and finally came out with a threshold of $684 a week or 35 grand a year. Now you look at that number right away, that's 684, an exempt employee. Many people are going to get way more of that than on unemployment. Okay, they're going to make more than the equivalent. They're going to make more than 35 grand a year at a rate of more than 35 grand a year on unemployment. And so if you want to keep somebody an exempt status, meaning you don't have to worry about the hours they keep, then you have to pay them at least, even when that reduced pay, $684 a week. Okay. Now, that's with exempt employees. If they work one day of the week, you have to pay them for the other 4, and except for the week that you hire them or fire them. So it's some companies are either even changing people right now from an exempt status to an hourly status while they go through COVID-19. So just watch that you don't take the wage rates down below this minimum requirement. Now, what you can have people do is use some of their PTO, and that you can supplement it with those other types of things where it's discretionary. The PTO, you can say, hey, no, we're going to keep you up to this level. We're going to require you to take a portion of your PTO. Again, there's what you can do and what you should do, because we also have relationships to manage in all of this. We wanted people to come back to work for us. You know, all the surveys tell me 2/3 of people are disengaged. You know, they had their highest, Gallup does this survey poll, they had the highest rate of engagement ever last year, 34%. I've got to believe that given the environment that you guys in, around animals, kind of small business, the engagement levels are higher than that, let's hope, right? But you still have that to be concerned about. Are people going to want to work for you, or are they going to see how the other place took care of their employees, and that's the place I'd rather work when this is all over with? So we have other issues involved here. Now, the ADA, the only place that the ADA really shows up in this is in telecommuting. So let's say somebody got a disability because of all of this sickness. Can they telecommute? Well, the law says you have to let them try. Even if you don't want anybody else to telecommute voluntarily, no, we don't telecommute in this place. The law says that if somebody's got a disability and an answer may be telecommuting, they get to be the one-off. And you can't say it's not going to work. You almost have to try it and show that, hey, see, I told you it didn't work. Unless you can show up front, there's going to be some undue hardship. We're dealing with highly sensitive information. The IT structure isn't there to maintain the privacy requirements that we have, etc. All right. Now, one of the challenges in all of this is getting doctor's notes. So your company's sick pay policies might say if you're gone for 3 days, we need a doctor's note. The FMLA says you got to have a doctor fill out a form. The ADA allows you to get a doctor's note. Even these laws, the expanded FMLA say you can have a doctor's note. Even the sick pay say you can have. The problem is getting a doctor's note. Doctors don't want to be bothered with your workplace stuff right now. They're not going to say, hey, yeah, let me take time out of dealing with this crisis to write you a doctor's note, all right? So what you can at least do is take advantage of the telemedicine that you've got going on. All of you who do provide benefits to your employees. I know not everybody does, but those of you who do, make sure you understand what the telemed options that are available to your employees. Let the employees know, and let the employees that know that before they make any request of you, that you go ahead and have them speak to the telemed people and find out what was said about that, that they'll certify that I spoke telemed and blank, blank, blank. So you want to do a little checklist, create a little checklist or form that they're filling out why they're not coming back to work, why they're taking a sick leave. So at least later on, when you're trying to get your credits back, you can prove that, hey, we just didn't monkey with the system. All right. Now, HIPAA is a privacy protection around health information. And basically, in the crisis, it's disappeared. The only place where you have to watch is you can't say, hey, one of my employees, Bob Smith, got coronavirus and blasted out to the whole world when it's not the whole world's information. Now, you are allowed to let people know who that Bob Smith might have infected, that Bob's exposed, and we're going to have to figure out now, we're going to ask you to quarantine for 2 weeks. We're going to ask you to say, hey, you can stay here and let you see if you've got symptoms. One of the scariest things about this whole thing is a lot of people don't realize Wuhan is where they've gotten the most data. Now, you can't trust a lot of what data is coming out of China, but at least some of what the data that they got out of Wuhan is they tested a lot of people there. Don't forget, a lot of these tests were manufactured in Wuhan. And so they test a lot of people there. 8 out of 10 people who tested positive weren't aware they had Wuhan, or they've recovered from Wuhan. So the symptomology, in fact, I got a call from one of the CEOs that I was coaching, came out to visit me. I took him out on my boat. We went out to dinner. That was a Friday night. Saturday night, we were supposed to catch up for dinner. He wasn't feeling well again. He wasn't feeling well, so he canceled it. Sunday, I said goodbye to him when he left. It was kind of flu-like symptoms. Well, he called me last week and said, hey, Don, I can't do our coaching session. I've let everybody know I'm positive. I'm like, yo, when did you find that out well, I was on a ski trip with these guys before I came to visit you. They all got tested positive. And I said, when did you get your test? He goes, 10 days ago. I go, how come you didn't tell me at that point? I mean, so, you know, I was definitely exposed to these people. I was around them, you know, as close as you can get. No 6-foot rule, hugging each other, doing all that kind of stuff. His wife had it too. I had a little bit of a sore throat, and I was thinking, well, maybe just from talking so many damn webinars. But for all I know, I've had coronavirus. I've been around my son and my wife. They're fine. For all I know, I do have coronavirus. For all I know, they do have. You might have it, and you just don't know, okay? So just realize that one of the crazy things about this is 4 out of 5 times, you don't know if you've got it. There's no signs of it, okay? So that's the HIPAA. Just keep it on a need-to-know basis. And when you're asking about people's symptomology, so the ADA and privacy and all that still applies, you really want to talk about if somebody's want to discern whether it's allergies, cold, or flu, right? All of those things are not covered by the ADA. They're not covered by the FMLA. That's what sick pay is for, right? But you can discern in the 2 main things. You see these guns, these heat guns that can go to people's foreheads all the time, is a fever and a dry cough. So right now, this is allergy season in a lot of parts of the country, and many of the symptoms are fine, a little scratchy throat, but there's no cough, there's no difficulty in breathing, little nasal running, that's about it. But that doesn't mean you've got coronavirus, so don't freak out. We're comp apply, OSHA and we're comp applying all of this. So you can see this little pyramid that OSHA put together. And if you're working in finance, where everybody's working out of the house right now, you're at low risk. If you're working in a hospital, you're at high risk, okay? I think with all the interaction and the closeness of everything that's part and parcel to your industry, that the people can't telecommute, that you're kind of in this medium/high arena. The bottom line is OSHA says you have to create a safe workplace. You know they have to do that as vis-a-vis the animals, right? But now we have to create a safe workplace vis-a-vis this law. And listen, when 4 out of 5 people are arguably don't know they have it, and the exposure numbers are so much greater than the testing numbers, what's a safe workplace anymore? We really don't know, okay? But if somebody's sick and you're saying, hey, you know, you're going to keep working next to them and you're going to keep working, you're creating an unsafe workplace and is a place in hell for you, okay? So you common sense in all of this, all right? And one of the other things is about workers' comp. If somebody gets sick on the job, can they file a work comp claim? Now, most people won't, but if they choose to, most were, you know, this is all state governed. So most of these insurance commissioners who are behind the work comp laws are saying that unless it's endemic to the type of work. So if a nurse out there on the front line gets COVID-19, they're entitled to work comp. Now, why would somebody maybe want to go to work comp versus unemployment or something else? Because the health bills are paid for. I had a woman who did have health coverage talk about, because of how she was handled, she had to go to ER 3 times. They did all these tests on it to rule out coronavirus because they didn't have a test available for coronavirus. Her bill was $15,000. Now, how's she going to pay that? That's after the insurance paid for things. So, you know, she's got her limit on a high deductible plan, whatever it was, well, a $15,000 bill. I would want to go on work comp if I was that person too, okay? So that's where that's going to show up. But unless you're somehow creating an unsafe work environment, ask people to knowingly go into a risky health environment, it should not be covered by workers' compensation. All right. Now, you may see some states saying, okay, we're going to let you do it for this little weird off thing we have, but that's when you go back to working with your work comp broker and looking at your insurance commissioner's website. Like I said, you're really going to find out the quality of your providers through all of this. All right. And we have this incredible distinction in state laws. I believe, as well as a lot of people believe, that the federal government should have stepped up and shut this thing down really quickly to really flatten that curve. Then maybe people wouldn't have hung out in Mardi Gras together, or on the beaches in Clearwater together, or at birthday parties that people are still having in parks. So this is the latest. This website for the National Conference of State Legislatures is amazing. And when you go to the website, it's on my document, you scroll down, it'll show you all the laws have stepped up. So cowboy up, good for you, Texas, and a couple other places, you know, still not worried about it. And there's certain areas in the country that are not hotspots. So interestingly, all of California is a very low rate per 1,000 people of coronavirus, very low rate. It's more on the East Coast. New Orleans is only, that whole area is second to New York City because of Mardi Gras, just because of Mardi Gras. It reminds me of the parade in Pennsylvania when they had the Spanish flu. All right, let's still party. Okay, well, you got to use common sense even where the state's not stepping up or the Fed's not stepping up. But that's where you can go. And you scroll down from their website, and you'll see all the laws passed in every state. Now, we have a lot of state laws involved. So many of you might be in a state where there's mandated sick pay. So if somebody goes out for 2 weeks on federal law, then they can say, hey, I'm going to use my 3 days of California mandated sick pay, or my 5 days of San Diego County sick pay, or my sick pay from my policy that I've got. There are laws supporting school or daycare closures. And, you know, if you have 25 or more employees or 50 more employees, depending on what state you're in. There's states that have paid family leave. So for example, California, again, almost like unemployment insurance and Medicare, they added a tax for paid family leave. Now, interestingly, but very few people realize that many states will allow you as an independent contractor to get unemployment or paid family leave, but you have to sign up for the program and get those things taken out of your paycheck as if you were an employee. People have first responder leave. So if somebody's being called into the National Guard, their job is protected and things like that. And they have a right to their job back, of course, unless it's been completely eliminated. State disability laws for short-term disability. Somebody may be so sick with coronavirus, that they're really not unemployed, they're disabled, they can't work if they wanted to, that would put them onto state disability for up to a year. You may have a short-term disability policy that you've worked with. You might have brought in AFLAC and people have purchased short-term disability policies. The unemployment system we've already talked about. And of course, then again, you have the vacation accrual laws. If people want to use their vacation, they can. Do they have to get permission to use vacation? What is your policy set up and what's your state law say around it? So before I fly into anything else, let's, any new questions for me?
No, I think that you answered one. Somebody was asking about filing for unemployment and the SBA emergency declaration.
My answer, and that's what I've seen through so much, just apply for all of it. You know, it's a lot of cutting and pasting anyway. Get a document where you can cut and paste into the next document. It's going to be a lot of the same information, and nobody's going to punish anybody for applying for everything. They're just not. Okay. Now, you can't use both, so you got to be very clear, right? If they say yes on one of them, you can't exactly use both. There's no double dipping allowed per se, you know.
Okay, I do want to remind everybody listening to open up your handouts over on the right-hand side of your control panel. There are some handouts there with a lot of this information on there.
And I'm going to show a little bit of that before we finish off, because I'm going to come out of the PowerPoint and go to a couple places on the web you should see.
Okay.
All right.
So I just wanted to remind everybody to go over there and download those while it was open.
So now, are you guys an essential business? And I'll show you in a minute. The American Kennel Association has done a pretty good job of looking at all these state closures. And I took a quick look at it. In many of these places, the sad news is you're not. All right. In other places, you may be. So maybe you manage canine dogs for the police department. Well, you might be able to stay open. That might be an interesting new opportunity for you. All right. So the Fed has defined some of those, but this is really being run at a state level, and I'll show you the website for that in a minute. One of the best sites I've seen of all, Bain is a big investment firm, and they advise many employers. And I think that what they put on their website in terms of business continuation and just thinking about all this is as good as anything I've seen. All right. And I'll give you the list to that. But if you just go and type Google Bain business continuity, you'll see this popping up because it's been shared a lot. It's really, really good. And, you know, here's the point. If you are paying people and they're not busy, well, then get learning. Or if you're not busy, get learning. I'm using this time to constantly reinvent myself. So when I go back out speaking, my stuff's better than it's ever been. I'm reinventing, you know, what else do I want to write? What else? So I'm using this time. You always have this fantasy, if I only had time, well, now you got it, all right? For many of us, if you want my book on managing emotional energy or stop making mistakes, shoot me an email and I'll send you the book. I'll shoot my information afterwards. There's a lot of LinkedIn learning involved, and there's some great LinkedIn learning involved for remote workers, and LinkedIn learning just set that out for free for a lot of people. I just posted on my blog site about that. If you want to teach people how to be a great employee, put a program together for that. Or you can get a certification. This is a great time for you to actually learn things from the people that you're servicing. So they've got time too. Guess what? You know, so they'll be more likely to fill out the Survey Monkey that you send to them. Just don't overwhelm them with questions, but what services would you like to help us have us help you with at this time, given the fact that we know our place is closed, or, you know, on dog walking or some of the other options. So this is a good time to survey people and maybe even create a new product. It's a great time to be creative. So last one here, before we go out to the web. This is one of the best books I've read, and I've been reading a book a week for 30 years. This is one of the best books I've ever read. And Nassim Taleb, I should have been smarter based on the first book I read of his, The Black Swan. So this is what this coronavirus is known as, a black swan event. He wrote it after 9/11, calling incidences like that a black swan. Well, guess what? We got hit with another one. And this in his third book, he talks about how we get through these chaotic situations. and defines people. Let's say somebody is at minimum wage, low unemployment, low education. They can work for you, but they don't have many other skill sets. They get into this situation, they are very fragile. Well, at least the government's created a safety net so they don't fall through it. Protect against some evictions and things like that. But they're in a very fragile situation. They need the safety net because we really, even though we can say I saved and you shouldn't be helped because you didn't, well, you cut that nonsense out and realize they're a human being and you got to help them. The second type of thing is resistant, right? So my wife and I have saved. We've got, they said you save up for 6 months. We've saved up for 6 months of expenses, and that stuff might disappear. Never mind what already disappeared in the stock market, but that's savings. But that's resistance. You're able to take the hit and come back and build yourself up again. When you're anti-fragile, as it says here, you gain from disorder. When your business comes back on, it is better than ever. You have repainted the place. You have spent time refurnishing the place. You've got your marketing materials up together. You're actually coming back stronger. And the reason you see a fire here, because his metaphor for being anti-fragile is you want to be the fire emblazoned by the wind. I love that. That's how I want to feel about this. Freaking, I'm on fire, dude, as it is, and I'm going to come out of this stronger. This is going to test me. It's like lifting weights. I'm going to test myself and come out of this stronger. Okay. I love the metaphor. Now, there's my contact information. I will come back to it. It's on a bunch of the materials and things like that. But let's go out of this now and let me show you some websites I'm saving for you. Okay. So the first one, they have done, I even emailed them. I said, why do you allow Google ads to cover your really good stuff? This is amazing. They got great stuff. They got stupid Google ads you can't get rid of, right? But they've outlined all the state exemptions, right? So you can go in here and see what they've said, what's and there's the link to what's pet stores and vets are excluded. But are you considered a pet store? So you got to look at what's excluded in this. So a business that provides food, shelter, and other necessity of life for animals, including kennels, are essential in Arizona. So you've got to go through this and really understand, if you haven't already, but chances are many of you already figured this out. But some states, as you can see, Texas hasn't issued that stuff yet, right? So you go to, let me see, Texas, Dallas County just started one, effective through April 3rd. Well, they're going to have to reissue that after today, right? Okay, so this is a great resource. I would really check that out. I'd also go to that council legislature site. I'll show you in the document, and they've got the laws in there too. So now, these are that fact I was talking about, where they're going through all the different questions about wage allowance, sick policy, and stuff like that. You go back here, COVID-19, just go to Department of Labor. Then you've got the other Q&A. You got the posters and stuff, but this is a 59 question Q&A. And it's going to only get longer about all the different bells and whistles about opening and closing and loans and stuff like that. It just, so I have some, they just added a few. It was at 59. They just added these today. All right, so and I've got it. They just went from 59 to 79 today. So after this, I've got a whole bunch of reading to do, and so do all of you folks, because I haven't had a chance even. This is how dynamic and fluid that this is. All right, that's why these links are so valuable. So you bookmark this thing and don't forget it. All right. Now, the next thing is the loan assistance, and they've done a pretty good job for it. So this is economic injury disaster loan that you can go through, and it says, would you apply? I applied for all these things. This was very easy to go through. Right? Paycheck Protection Program, again, all the information around that. The economic injury loan, all the content around that. This is, I thought, a great thing on your site that you guys ought to look at, because this is about that creativity. Here's a whole bunch of ideas that were put up there. I don't know who did this on your team, but they did a great job of it. So all of you, look at this. And if you've got employees, remember that none of us are smart as all of us. What ideas do they have for people, for keeping this door open, for keeping our jobs? So really look at the opportunities that you have in here. And again, I think this is an absolute excellent checklist. Now you go to my website. So I put up this COVID-19 link, all right? The PowerPoint is there, and it's also in your handout folder. A webinar that I did previously, you're going to have the recording of this one. This is a book I made about stop making mistakes, given my background. It's in PDF there. I would read it. I would at least check out the checklist in the back, because what you don't want to do is make things worse for yourself right now. This is a good way to check your head going through all this. It's a very quick read. I like to make books that we can get through quickly. Check that out. And that checklist, I wish I had that. I'm 63 now. I wish I had that checklist when I was 30. It would have saved me making a whole bunch of mistakes over those following 30 years, all right? So take a look at that. And last, I put this up on Google Doc because it's so dynamic. Now I'm going to updated it on April 1st. Now I'm going to have to go through all these facts and see if there's anything else I got to update on it. But there's just all this information about the loan resources, IRS. The Chamber does a good job of sharing all of this. Take advantage of looking at all these things, all right? So you've got my most recent version they put into a PDF of the presentation, but this is where I will keep updating things. It goes through it, all the different aspects of the law, the small business exemption, and the fact that I pointed out before to you, all the additional federal government resources, that national state legislature link that I was telling you about. I've had help with a couple of states specifically, so some of their stuff is up there. Some absolutely great articles that I've come across that I think have been as good as anything, so I put them up there. You know, like the psychological impacts from Scientific American. That's good stuff, right? And then there's a lot about remote work. Great time to learn things. And link that you've got my LinkedIn training. And then you've got stuff from LinkedIn that they're doing a lot of free training on remote work. So check that out. So you get to learn about LinkedIn Learning, which I think is the best learning any place. All right. So let me go back to the PowerPoint and see what didn't want to do that, sorry. I want to do just the opposite of that. And this. Hopefully that was helpful. And what questions does anybody else have today?
Okay, so if someone's wages were reduced, can they apply for unemployment like they would for reduced hours?
Yes.
Okay.
They can, again, this is a whole, my answer to all this stuff is apply and try. Yeah, you know, that's seriously, because we don't, I can sit here and sound like a smart guy, but I don't know the answers to a lot of this stuff. I do not know how these agencies are going to react to the Fed telling them you got to do things. They can tell you, we don't want your money and we're not going to give anybody $600. That's not how we roll in Montana, okay? I really don't know a lot of the answers to all these, because they don't know the answer to all this stuff yet, all right? So my answer to that is find out, apply. Check out your EDD site and they will tell you, or at least try to find out from them, hey, if I reduce wages, will they get unemployment? Because that's going to vary state by state.
Okay, that actually answered several of the questions that had come in. So
It just, for example, let me go, I'll show you, I'll go to a website quick and show you. So if you just go to a new one here. So California EDD, all right? They've got a whole bunch going on here on unemployment. So you can go, they have a whole coronavirus page, okay. Coronavirus resources. So they talk about all the different things that you can do, the latest notice for employers, sick or quarantined, you know, reduced work hours, That's what you want to look at no matter what state you're in, because it's different in every state. All right. That's the answer.
Someone had one last question here with regards to filing unemployment. I live in Florida, but the business is in Georgia. Do you apply for that in the business state?
Typically, you apply to where you're doing your work, because employment law is governed not by the location. Let's say I have a Nevada corporation, but all my employees in California. All the employment laws are governed by California, not by Nevada. So it's where you're doing work is what governs where you get unemployment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And a lot of thank yous on here, Don.
Yeah. Good. And again, if you check, connect with me on LinkedIn, that's always kind of fun. Just Don Phin. There's nobody else with my name. Go ahead, go there on LinkedIn. And if you've got any questions, email me and I'll try to find an answer to them, because I like to be the answer man. I don't like to get stumped. But a lot of times it's very hard to answer things. I'd have to say, maybe I don't know yet.
Don, thank you so much for the presentation. It was fantastic, as I knew it would be. And folks, I have, once again, I'm going to stay open a little bit so you can download those handouts. Now, the handout that Don showed you that is on Google Docs, I'm going to go up there and I've grabbed that. I'm going to put it in the member dashboard. As Don updates that, I'll continue to go grab it and put it in the member dashboard for you all. So you'll always have that most current doc as Don continues to do the updates. Don, thank you so much.
And you'll see the update date on the doc, so you'll know if I updated it, okay?
That's fantastic. Yeah. So you all be safe, and we'll be bringing more webinars this next week. Yeah. Thank you, Don.
Take care, everybody, and be well. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye.
Remember, responsibility and grace, okay?
That's right.
That's right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.